Hello, and welcome to Pieces of History with Curating Collections. I'm your host, Crystal, a preservation-focused public historian here at Curating Collections, and I'm joined by my husband and producer, Andrew, bringing his naturally curious nature, who has a background in tech and is here to ask questions and help make sense of everything. This podcast tells the stories of humanity through the objects and documents that have managed to survive them, with today's episode focusing on a piece of history that I created, taking a look through my own experience and sharing some of the highlights and must-see spots on a wonderful America 250 centered trip. This episode is a bit different than some of the previous episodes, focusing on a personal experience, museum layouts, and historical interpretation that I myself got to enjoy and reflect on. It's not going to focus on the history of the American Revolution. It's not going to be a specific museum review or a detailed itinerary plan. But this is Field Trip to Philadelphia.
Well, Crystal, we had a great time in Philadelphia, 3 whole days, and they were jam-packed. So without further ado, let's just kind of dive into your take on the trip, what we saw, and your thoughts on it.
Yeah, so this trip specifically started the beginning of my new travel journal, which I was really excited about. It was an opportunity to write down about the experiences and kind of help me remember what I was seeing as I was seeing it. It was also a great way to incorporate some of those little souvenirs that you get. So I was keeping tickets, I was keeping rack cards, those little papers that you get at every trip that you're not really sure what to do with. I decided to incorporate into my journal to help me better visualize, remember, and enjoy the trip that we took to Philadelphia. So I was taking different things from the trip that we took on. So this was part of a map, this was a wristband, this was a receipt from dinner, just kind of clipping different pieces from things that I wanted to remember specifically about the trip.
How did it make you feel?
It was really fun. It was a really fun way to end the day and be able to reflect on the places that we had visited and the sites that we had seen while we were there.
Was this inspired by some of the diaries or letters or things that you've read? Because I know that is one of your niches that you do enjoy reading about.
I'm so glad you asked. So in addition to loving doing the research within diaries, journals, ledgers, things that are written in individuals' own hands, it's a great way to get first-person information. It's an awesome way to see what people of the past thought was important. In addition to that, my favorite genre of fiction is also the diary schematic, so things written in the first person. As a kid, I read almost all of the Dear America books, and they follow this same pattern. And recently, actually, I finished listening to Prairie Fires, which is a book about Laura Ingalls Wilder. And one thing that really stuck out to me was that when Laura was traveling from South Dakota to, I believe it was Missouri, she kept a travel journal to record all of the details of the trip, the travel itself, the processes, everything that went into traveling across the country. And I absolutely loved that idea. And with this year being the 250th anniversary of American independence, I decided that I wanted to try my hand at keeping my own.
And so with that, what stood out to you as momentous within that semi-quincentennial anniversary?
Seeing Philadelphia itself was really cool as an American historian, as someone who has spent, the years that I've spent studying American history, being able to see kind of that cradle of liberty idea was really, really cool. And seeing the effort that is going in with this year being such a big year for American history was really, really exciting. So we started off our trip with what I would argue is probably one of the biggest attractions in Philadelphia for a historian. We started off at Independence Hall. We actually got to learn about the original furnishings in the building because they had interpreters present inside Independence Hall. All three rooms, the entrance foyer, the courtroom, and the signers hall, all had park rangers present to answer questions, to share fun facts, to include information, and make sure that everyone who was walking through Independence Hall had access to the answers to the questions of, what's the cage for inside the courtroom? And is any of this furniture original to the time period of the Founding Fathers? And just all of that information is available because they had on-hand personal interpreters that knew what they were talking about, were excited about the information that they were sharing, and were willing and capable of handling the crowds that were walking through Independence Hall at that time. And it was just a really interesting way to ensure that people were kind of moving through the space, so they didn't have a ton of signage that would have caused a lot of congestion in a building of that size, but with as many people as visit Independence Hall on a daily, weekly basis. So it was a really cool way of allowing people access to information without overwhelming them with text and keeping them congested inside one area for an extended period of time. So walking out of the Independence Square, we had the opportunity to go through the American Philosophical Society's brand new America 250 exhibit, the brand new Declarations of Independence exhibit by the American Philosophical Society. It had literally just come on display in the middle of April 2026. It'll be on display through January of 2027. They, in a very, very short period of time and in a very small room, walked you through pre-signing, signing, and post-signing of the Declaration of Independence, how it changed, what got edited, and in a way that wasn't super overwhelming, but allowed you to take the time to read the information. They also had guides throughout the gallery that were there to answer questions, that were incredibly knowledgeable and excited about what they were talking about. And by the time you got to the end, there was a little section where you could write down what the Declaration of Independence means to you today. And then you head back outside, out the front doors of another historic building in Philadelphia.
And a historic staircase, of which you were very excited.
Of course. I want to touch on the Liberty Bell really fast, just because I think it would be remiss to not mention the Liberty Bell in a Philadelphia trip from a historian. And I need to mention National Treasure. And telling you the entire time about Pass and Stowe and you having no idea what I was talking about. And the whole reason I know that is because National Treasure.
Before we get to the President's House, which is very cool, we stopped by to see the Liberty Bell, which is right on the way.
The entire time I had been talking about Pass and Stowe being engraved on the front of the Liberty Bell and how excited I was to really get to see some of the details of the bell itself and the excitement that I had in actually getting to see it up close and personal, aside from, knowing that Pass and Stowe is on it because of National Treasure. Having the opportunity to actually see the size of the Liberty Bell and the crack and just kind of all of these iconic emblems of American independence come to life was just a really cool aspect of Philadelphia that I knew was there, but still caught me by surprise.
And I know we're going to get there, but speaking of that, our very first evening, we had pulled into the hotel, registered and everything, and we're walking out just to get some bite to eat. And we walk literally by Christ Church Cemetery, and they have a gap in the brick wall where it is wrought iron fencing. And I look down to my left, and there is the grave of Benjamin Franklin, and that kind of same surreal feeling where you're like, this is the Liberty Bell. That is Ben Franklin's grave. Like, there's history just all around you in that city.
And it's just such a unique feeling. And it was just really, really cool to get to experience that. And then to go from something as iconic as like the Liberty Bell to an aspect of that same time period that I wasn't as familiar with. So we walk out of the Visitors Center at Independence Hall National Historical Park and are greeted by what looks like some chimneys, windows, and maybe a floor plan on the ground.
It's like the ruins of an old house,
but recreated. And as we walk closer to it, there is glass on the ground, and you can look down into the glass and see the archaeological remains of what was originally the president's house while the capital of the United States was in Philadelphia. It's an aspect of early American history that kind of never crossed my mind. I knew that the president had to have lived in Philadelphia, but realizing that they had torn the president's house down and there's nothing left but remains that were found during an archaeological dig, it was just really, really neat to see. And the way that they interpreted the information around it, some of the information that they had on the ruins that were there and on life at the president's house in, the late 1700s was just really well done. And it was what I had thought was a very, very unique way of showcasing information. And I say that because we actually went from the ruins of the president's house back through the historic district of Philadelphia and ended up at the ruins of Benjamin Franklin's house, which did a very similar thing with the fact that Benjamin Franklin's house is no longer there. They had the floor plan on the ground. They had the quotes from Benjamin and Deborah Franklin's letters to one another about building the house, renovating the house, where certain things were, how they were doing things. And then additionally, they had the glass looking down into the archaeological remains of where the house once stood.
I think those are some of the things that struck us the most, but there was so much more in Philadelphia.
So in looking into what to visit in Philadelphia, as an American historian during America 250, the two big museums that really came up was the Museum of the American Revolution and the National Constitution Center. So we visited the American Revolution Museum first and had the opportunity to look through the galleries that they had there. And personally, I got to enjoy the exhibit called Revolutionary Place, which is technically the children's area of the museum, but there's not an age limit, so if you want to go in there, you can. And I got to really enjoy some of the storytelling technologies and interpretations that they had available for kids. So they had a section where kids could dress up in colonial and revolutionary clothing. They had a really cool interactive tech table where you could place an object onto this display board and it would tell you where that item had shipped from to Philadelphia and some additional information about it. And it was a really unique way to be able to feel an item with your hands and also see information about where it's coming from. But of the museums that we visited in Philadelphia, I would have to say that my favorite was the National Constitution Center. They had several exhibits, one of which was, let me look, I have it in my travel journal, called America's Founding Gallery, And it was a new exhibit set up for America 250. They have another exhibit opening later this year, also for America 250. But it did an amazing job of going through some of the arguments over the creation of the American Constitution, of showcasing how everyday life was at the time period that the Constitution was being debated and signed, and how that would have been impacted by a federal government setting up a specific type of governance based on something like the Constitution. And they had, uniquely, I think, something that they called Signers Hall, which featured life-size bronze statues of every signer of the American Constitution. I think for me it was so unique because we rarely have the opportunity to feel like we're walking through the halls of history. And to be in a room that is set up to look like where the Constitutional Congress met, to see them, to see George Washington as tall as he was, to see William Rogers in the way that he would have looked at this time period, and to be able to walk among all of these men and to then be able to learn a little bit more about them and to see the displays that were around the room that were incredibly interactive. You could pull books out and they had information about books written by the individuals who were signing the Constitution. And it was just a really immersive experience without the aspect of like live historic reenactment that usually comes with the idea of an immersive experience. And it just really highlighted the reality of the signing of the Constitution. We had the opportunity to get to see Eastern State Penitentiary, which was a prison built in Philadelphia in 1830 that contained prisoners until 1970. It was a massive prison structure. It went through several phases of addition. It went through several phases of renovation where they started moving in different directions of corrections. Walking in, we were able to see that this was definitely going to be different than some of the other places we had visited in Philadelphia. When you first walk into the halls of the prison, you can tell that not everything is restored. So the site itself is in a state of semi-ruin. So a lot of the cells, the plaster on the ceiling is falling off. The roots of trees are growing through the windows. The falling apart cots and shelving units are still lying in pieces on the floor.
And this isn't because the people who are preserving it are doing a bad job either.
Right. This state of semi-ruin is purposeful. When the organization that operates the museum took control of the site, they realized very quickly how expensive a full restoration would be. But also realized that just allowing it to continue to decline would eventually mean that there was no site in Philadelphia where you could learn about the first prison of its kind, where you could learn about the history of the penal system and crime and punishment and the thoughts and theories of how to handle criminals from the 19th through the 20th centuries. So letting that go wasn't optional if you want to be able to have a site to share that information. But doing a complete restoration was also not possible because the site is massive. So being able to see how the site declined after its abandonment in 1970 was incredible. And they do a really great job of highlighting all of the aspects of its history. So there's an entire wing where you just get to learn about the 1830 development of the prison. Then there's an entire wing where you get to hear the actual voices of people who either were held or worked in the prison until its close in 1970. And there are sections of the prison that have been restored. So At one point, Al Capone was held in Eastern State Penitentiary, and they have the cell where Al Capone was likely held completely restored to what it would have looked like when he was held there. They have a synagogue that was constructed and refurbished and maintained by Jewish prisoners in Eastern State Penitentiary in the 20th century. They have that completely restored. They also have a really unique little exhibit on it. After the abandonment, they have some of the artifacts from the synagogue that were found. They have those original artifacts on display where you can see them and learn a little bit more about religion inside of penitentiaries like Eastern State. So there's so many aspects of history that you're able to see from this one site. And as you stand in the middle of the penitentiary, you can look down and you can turn in a circle and you can see down rows upon rows upon rows of what would have been cells where individuals were living their lives after being sentenced. And just being able to see all of those variations of history from 1830 to 1970, from 1970 to 2026, and the way that the system has changed, the use of the building has changed, and being able to appreciate what was there and how it changed the world, and what is there and how it has changed the interpretation of punishment and the interpretation of a system that was built in a place as historic as Philadelphia was just a really unique site. It really brought together a lot of what we saw in Philadelphia in the sense that we had so many different centuries, so many different decades that we were looking at, and it's all a part of the American story. So America 250 definitely has a focus on 250 years ago in 1776, but it doesn't end in 1776, it starts. So we have the opportunity to look at the American story through 250 years, because that's what America 250 is the whole of 250 years of history that we have the opportunity to look at. We were looking to see the American story, and for the purposes of this trip, it started in 1776, but it certainly didn't end there. We went all the way up through the 1970s, 1980s. We ended up at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, where we ran up the stairs just like Rocky, because that's a part of the American story too. You have these iconic moments like the Liberty Bell and like the Rocky Stairs, but you have the personal ties that come with them as well. We went and saw the Rocky Stairs because I grew up watching the Rocky movies, and it meant something to me. It meant something to my dad. It was something that we got to share together, and it was a unique aspect of the American story that we kind of got to see across the spectrum of 250 years. I want to thank you for listening to Pieces of History with Curating Collections. If you work with or care about historic collections, this is the kind of work that I do. Our next episode, we will focus on another object and another human story related directly to that object. I hope you continue to listen, share, and take a deeper look at the pieces of history around you.